Story 1. My brother ruined my wedding. My parents took his side and called me the weak son. But now he betrayed them and they are begging me for help. There are days that change everything in your life, for better or for worse. In my case, it was the night of my wedding rehearsal. I do not even know where to begin because that was the night my family life broke forever. My brother, Lucas, 27, was always my parents' star. He was the son who could do no wrong, the center of all conversations at family dinners, the one who always had more opportunities and excuses. I, Nate, 29, was the opposite, the one who did his own thing quietly and without causing problems. The one nobody noticed, but at least I did not disappoint, or so I thought. We were planning my wedding with Emma, the most incredible woman I have ever known. We had been together for 5 years, and she had always supported me in everything, even in my complicated relationship with my family. When we decided to get married, Emma was the one who convinced me to include my parents in the preparations. I did not want problems, and although I knew they and I had a tense relationship, I thought it would be good for the family to be together. I agreed, albeit with doubts. The rehearsal dinner was at an Italian restaurant in San Francisco, a small, cozy place that Emma adored. It was an intimate evening, just with close friends and family. Everything was going perfectly. Emma looked radiant in a red dress, and I could not stop smiling. For a moment, I thought this was the life I had always wanted, surrounded by loved ones, celebrating a bright future with the woman I love. But of course, Lucas had to ruin it. From the moment he arrived, I noticed something strange. Lucas did not bring a partner, which was not unusual because he always said he did not have time for romantic nonsense. But his attitude that night was different. He was too attentive to Emma, throwing compliments at every opportunity. "You look incredible, Emma. How did this idiot convince you to marry him?" he said, laughing, but there was something in his tone that was not a joke. Everyone laughed uncomfortably, including me, because I thought it was just his way of being unpleasant. As the night progressed, Lucas continued with his comments, increasingly direct. "Emma, if you ever get tired of this boring guy, call me," he blurted out as the waiters brought dessert. My patience was reaching its limit, but I decided to stay calm out of respect for Emma and the other guests. What I did not know was that while I was busy talking to a friend, Lucas had taken Emma aside. Later that night, Emma told me what had happened. Lucas told her that she deserved better than a mediocre guy like me, that he could give her a life that I could never offer. Emma, being the incredible person she is, confronted him immediately. She made it clear that what he was doing was disrespectful, not only to me but to her. And then she came directly to tell me what had happened. When I heard her words, rage invaded me. I walked directly towards Lucas, not caring that all the other guests were present. "What the hell do you think you are doing, Lucas?" I shouted, attracting the attention of the entire room. Lucas turned to me with a carefree smile as if nothing had happened. "What are you talking about, brother?" he replied with his usual sarcastic tone. "You know exactly what I am talking about. What did you say to Emma?" The silence in the restaurant was palpable. Everyone was looking at us, waiting for someone to intervene, but no one said anything. Lucas, true to his style, decided to double down on his cynicism. "I am just telling the truth, Nate. She is too much for you. Everyone knows it." It was at that moment that I lost control. I lunged at him, but some friends held me back before I could do anything stupid. Lucas just laughed as if this whole thing were a game. My parents, of course, rushed to defend him. "Nate, calm down. Do not make a scene," my mother said while my father looked at Lucas with something that seemed to be pride. I could not believe it. There was my brother, basically confessing that he had tried to sabotage my relationship, and my parents were acting as if I were the problem. After that night, I made a decision. Lucas was not invited to the wedding. I thought my parents would understand, but they did not. They told me I was being immature and resentful, that Lucas was their son too, and that they could not simply exclude him. "If Lucas is not invited, we will not go either," my mother said, as if that were going to make me change my mind. It hurt, but I maintained my position. Emma and I got married without them. It was a beautiful day, but also bittersweet. I thought that at least that would be the end of the drama, that I could cut Lucas out of my life and move on. But I had no idea what was to come. After the wedding, the relationship with my parents was completely broken. They did not congratulate me. They did not even send me a message on the day of the event. It was as if my existence had ceased to matter to them completely. My brother Lucas, on the other hand, continued to be the center of their attention. My uncles and some family friends told me that my parents justified their absence by saying that I had been too drastic in not inviting Lucas. The narrative they were building was that I had ruined the family, not the other way around. Emma tried to comfort me. She has always been my rock, but even she admitted that the situation was difficult. Maybe at some point they will understand. Nate, she said with optimism. I was not so sure. For my parents, Lucas was untouchable. His mistakes always had excuses. He is young. He does not mean it. Lucas is just Lucas. But what he did at my wedding was not something I could forgive. Months passed, and although I tried to keep my distance, I continued to receive news of my family through acquaintances. Every time I heard something, the pattern was the same. Lucas was still their preferred son, while I was the resentful one who could not get over things. One day, however, the blow that changed everything arrived. I was working from home when I received an unexpected text message from my mother. I ignored it at first, but she continued to insist until I finally decided to read it. We need to talk. It is urgent. Call when you can. I hesitated for a few minutes. I had not spoken to them since the wedding, and I had no interest in doing so now. But something in the tone of the message worried me. So, I finally called. My mother answered on the second ring. Her voice sounded tense, as if she were on the verge of tears. Nate, I need you to listen to this before you say anything. She began, but I could not help but interrupt her. What is it? I asked without much enthusiasm. She hesitated for a moment before blurting it all out. Apparently, Lucas had been asking them for money. During the last few months, he had convinced my parents that he was working on a great business opportunity that would change his life. But he needed initial capital. My parents, of course, gave him what he asked for without questioning anything. After all, how could they refuse to help their prodigal son? The problem was that now the money had disappeared. According to my mother, Lucas had cut off communication with them after receiving the last transfer. And they had no idea where he was. My father, a man always proud and authoritarian, was even forced to admit that perhaps they had made a mistake by trusting him. I did not know whether to laugh or cry. On the one hand, I was furious because my parents had allowed this to happen. On the other hand, I felt a dark satisfaction at seeing that they were finally paying the consequences of their blind favoritism. And what do you want me to do? I asked, my voice laden with sarcasm. My mother burst into tears. Please, Nate, you are the only one who can help us. You know how to track things. You have those technology skills. I remained silent for a few seconds, processing what she had just said. I could not believe that after everything that had happened, they had the nerve to ask me for help. You are asking me to track Lucas? To use my skills to solve a problem that you yourselves created? Nate, it is not that simple. It is our family. No, Mom, it is not. Lucas stopped being my family the day he tried to sabotage my relationship. And you stopped being my family the day you chose his side. I hung up before she could say more. My phone vibrated almost instantly with new messages, but I did not read them. I was too angry. That night, Emma found me sitting in the living room, staring at my computer. She knew something was wrong because I do not usually stay quiet for so long. What is it? She asked softly, sitting next to me. I told her what had happened. Every detail. She listened patiently, and when I finished, she sighed deeply. You know you do not owe them anything, right? I know, but I cannot help but feel that I am being cruel by not doing anything. Emma took my hands. Nate, it is not cruelty. They chose Lucas again and again, even when they knew it was wrong. If they are now facing the consequences, it is not your fault. Her words calmed me, but not completely. That night, I decided to block my parents' number. I did not want to know more. I was tired of being their second option, their plan B when things with Lucas went wrong. After blocking my parents' number, I felt a mixture of relief and guilt. On the one hand, I knew I did not owe them anything. They chose Lucas time and time again, even when it was clear he only caused trouble. But on the other hand, there was a small part of me that still wanted to have a family. That wished everything could be fixed. A few weeks passed in silence. I did not hear anything from my parents or Lucas, and Emma and I focused on our lives. We were planning a small trip to Lake Tahoe to disconnect, something we both needed after months of stress. However, the silence ended abruptly one afternoon when I received an email. It was from my father. The message was short, direct, and had a tone of desperation that I had not seen before. Nate, I know you do not want to hear from us, but this is serious. Lucas not only scammed us, he also stole important information from my company. If we do not recover those documents, we could lose everything. Please help us. I stared at the screen, feeling anger bubbling inside me. What was I supposed to do with this? My father was not the type to easily admit mistakes, so I knew they had to be truly desperate to send me that message. Emma came into the room at that moment and saw me reading the email. From your parents? She asked. I nodded. I showed her the message, and after reading it, she let out a long sigh. What are you going to do? Nothing, I replied, although I was not entirely sure. Emma looked at me with a mixture of understanding and concern. She knew this was not going to be as simple as ignoring it and moving on. The next day, I received another email, this time much more detailed. My father explained that Lucas had visited his office a few weeks ago under the pretext of looking for an opportunity to redeem himself. My parents, in their infinite naivete, had given him temporary access to some company files, thinking he could help with a project. What they did not know was that Lucas was collecting confidential information, contracts, market strategies, even data from important clients. When they realized what he had done, it was already too late. Lucas disappeared, cutting off all communication, but before leaving, he had the nerve to leave a note on my father's desk, along with a fake business card from a competing company. The message was simple but chilling. "Thank you for the information. I always knew I could count on you." My mother, according to the email, was devastated. My father, on the other hand, was furious, not only with Lucas but with himself for having been so naive. Now they were facing a possible business crisis, and they did not know who to turn to. That is why they were asking me for help. That night, Emma and I talked about the situation. "I know you do not want to get involved, and you have every right not to," she said, always my voice of reason. "But if you decide to help them, let it be on your terms." I kept thinking about her words. I did not want to help my parents, not after everything they had done. But at the same time, I knew I had the skills to solve this. I worked in cybersecurity, and I could easily track the information Lucas had stolen, even find out where he was. But I wanted to do it on my terms. The next day, I finally replied to my father's email. "I am going to help you, but this will be the last time. I do not want anything more from you after this. And I want it to be clear that I am doing this because I do not want someone like Lucas to get away with it. Not because I care about you or what happens to your company." My father replied almost immediately, thanking me and promising that they would do whatever I asked. The following weeks were a whirlwind. I immersed myself in the investigation, tracking Lucas's movements and analyzing the documents he had stolen. It was a long and complicated process, but I finally managed to find him. Lucas had been using a fake email address to communicate with various contacts, trying to sell the information to competing companies. What he did not know was that I was intercepting those emails and following each of his movements. When I finally gathered all the evidence, I sent it to my parents along with a clear suggestion: report Lucas to the authorities. To my surprise, my father agreed, but my mother hesitated. "He is our son, Nate. I do not know if I can do it. That son betrayed you, robbed you, and now he is trying to ruin your company. What more does he have to do for you to understand that he is not a good person?" My mother burst into tears. But my father, for the first time, seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. "We will do it," he said firmly. A week later, Lucas was arrested. The evidence I gathered was enough to incriminate him. And although my parents tried to minimize the scandal, the news leaked. It was humiliating for them, but necessary. Lucas had crossed too many lines, and he was finally facing the consequences. For my part, I cut off all communication with my parents after that. I felt that I had done enough. My limits were clear, and I did not want to be part of their drama again. I thought it was all over after Lucas's arrest. Finally, my parents were facing the consequences of their decisions, and I had done what I considered fair. But as always, I underestimated Lucas. A few weeks after his arrest, I received a call from an unknown number. At first, I was not going to answer, but something prompted me to do so. "Hello," I answered cautiously. "Are you having fun with this, Nate?" Lucas's voice on the other end of the phone froze me. "What the hell do you want?" I replied, feeling rage begin to burn inside me. "To congratulate you. You played well this time, little brother. But do you think you won? I assure you, this is not over." Before I could respond, he hung up. I stared at the phone, my mind racing in all directions. What was he planning now? That night, Emma and I talked about the call. She was as worried as I was, but she tried to reassure me. "Lucas is a narcissist. He is furious because he lost, but he cannot do anything else. Now he has to face the consequences," she said, although her tone showed some doubt. I wanted to believe her, but I knew Lucas too well. He always found a way to ruin things, even from a distance. It was not long before the chaos started again. One afternoon, I received a message from my former boss at a cybersecurity company where I had worked years before. He told me that someone was circulating rumors about me, accusing me of using my skills for illegal activities. According to him, they had received an anonymous email that included falsified documents that supposedly proved that I had hacked systems for personal gain. I knew immediately that this was Lucas's doing. Who else would have the hatred and obsession necessary to try to destroy my career? I spent the following weeks clearing my name, gathering evidence to show that the documents were fake and that I had never done anything illegal. It was exhausting, both mentally and emotionally. Emma supported me at all times, But even she began to feel the tension as I struggled with the accusations. My parents re-entered the scene. My mother sent me a message asking me to reconsider my relationship with Lucas. We know that what he did was wrong, but he is still your brother. And he is suffering a lot now. When I read that message, I almost threw the phone against the wall. Suffering? Did they really think Lucas was the victim here? After everything he had done, they were still protecting him. I replied with a short and direct message. Do not contact me about Lucas again. You chose him, not me. Now deal with the consequences. Shortly after, I discovered that Lucas was trying to use my name to blackmail my parents. He told them that if they did not give him money to pay his lawyers, he would start leaking information about me, claiming that I had been involved in his schemes. My parents, in their infinite blindness, almost believed him. My mother even called me to ask me to make peace with him because they thought that maybe I had something to do with his legal problems. That was the last straw. I decided to take legal action against Lucas. I hired a lawyer to issue a restraining order against him, prohibiting him from any contact with me or Emma. I also sent a formal warning to my parents, telling them that if they continued to be involved in Lucas's attempts to sabotage my life, I would also take legal action against them. It was not an easy decision. Despite everything, they were my parents, and a part of me still wanted to have a relationship with them. But I knew that as long as they continued to defend Lucas, I could never see peace. My parents responded with a handwritten letter from my mother. It said they were disappointed with me, that they thought I was letting hate consume me. But for the first time, I did not care. They had made their decision, and I had made mine. Meanwhile, Emma and I focused on our life together. We took our trip to Lake Tahoe, enjoying a few days away from all the drama. During that time, we decided it was time to start planning something bigger, starting our own family. Shortly after, Emma got pregnant. It was the best news we had received in a long time. Suddenly, everything else seemed to fade away. Lucas, my parents, the drama, none of that mattered compared to the joy of knowing we were going to be parents. However, the past was not going to stay behind so easily. A few months later, my parents sent me an unexpected email. It said the following: Nate, we know you do not want to talk to us, but we needed to tell you this. Lucas betrayed us again. He forced us to sell part of our shares to pay him. And now we have lost control of the company. We do not know what to do. We just wanted to tell you that we are sorry for everything. For not supporting you. For not listening to you. We hope that someday you can forgive us. I read the email several times, trying to decide how I felt. On the one hand, I wanted to feel sorry for them. But on the other, I knew this was exactly what they deserved. They had created a monster. And now they were paying the price. That night, Emma and I talked about the email. Are you going to respond? She asked. I do not know. I admitted. Emma was silent for a moment before saying something that struck me. Do what is best for you and for our family. You do not owe them anything anymore. She was right. I let my parents' email go unanswered. I had reached a point in my life where my peace of mind and my family were more important than trying to fix something that was clearly broken. Emma and I were focused on our future, especially with the baby on the way. I had no time or energy to get involved again in the problems they had created themselves. But, as always, family problems have a way of finding their way back to your door. A few weeks after ignoring the email, I received another unexpected call. This time it was from a family friend, someone who had been close to my parents for years. His voice was serious, almost as if he were giving bad news. Nate, I am sorry to bother you with this, but I thought you should know. Your parents are losing their house. The impact of those words left me speechless. I did not know what to answer. What? How? It is Lucas. After selling the shares, it seems they used their savings to try to regain some control of the company. It all fell apart. Now they cannot pay the mortgage and are in danger of being evicted. I was silent for a moment. I felt a pang of pity, but it quickly vanished. How many times had they had the opportunity to make better decisions? How many times had they chosen Lucas over me, even when it was evident that he only brought trouble? Thank you for letting me know, but I am not going to get involved. I finally replied. I understand. I just thought you should know. He said and hung up. That night, I told Emma what had happened. They are still paying the consequences of having protected Lucas for so long. She said as she caressed her belly. You cannot save them, Nate. They do not even want to save themselves. I knew she was right. They had chosen Lucas, even when it was clear that he did not care about them. Now they were facing the result of those choices. And although a part of me wanted to help them, I knew that doing so would only prolong the cycle of destruction. A few weeks later, I received one last letter from my parents. It was brief, barely a paragraph, but its tone was different from anything I had received before. Nate, this will be the last time we try to contact you. We want you to know that we regret everything we did. We know we chose wrong. That we abandoned you when you needed us most. Now we understand that you were always right about Lucas. We just hope that someday you can forgive us. But if you do not, we will understand. We wish you, Emma, and our grandson all the best. If you ever decide that we can meet him. With love, Mom and Dad. I read the letter several times. For the first time, it seemed that they were being sincere. That they really understood the damage they had caused. But it was no longer enough. They had arrived too late. Emma and I moved on with our lives. Our son was born, a beautiful boy we named Leo. The day I held him for the first time, I knew that I would never allow someone like Lucas, or even my parents, to jeopardize the life and happiness of my family. We had built something solid, something I was not willing to sacrifice for anyone. Story 2. I married the most incredible single mother, but her 16-year-old son handed me a note that said, "I hope you ruin your life like you ruined ours." When I met Claire, I never imagined we would end up married. A normal 38-year-old guy with a quiet life in Austin, Texas, had learned not to expect too much from dating after a couple of epic failures in love. But when Claire appeared in my life, it was as if everything clicked. She was intelligent, funny, and although she carried a complicated past as a single mother of 2 teenagers, her energy was contagious. I met her at a local barbecue, one of those where it seems like the whole town shows up. We were by the grill, arguing over which was the best cut of meat. She swore by the brisket, I by the ribs, and we ended up talking for hours. Her laughter was like a spark of light, something that seemed to have been absent from my life for years. As we started dating, I knew immediately that there was something different about her. Claire wasn't afraid to talk about her past, although it was evident that there were scars. She had been married to a man named Richard, a guy who, from what she told me, was the definition of narcissism and manipulation. According to Claire, Richard had been the kind of husband who demanded everything and gave nothing. When she tried to have a serious conversation, he'd turn it into a monologue about how hard he worked to support her and the kids. What really made me admire her was her strength. Claire had left that relationship after 17 years, taking her 2 children, 16-year-old Max and 14-year-old Lily, and starting from scratch. It wasn't easy, especially because Richard wasn't the type of person who simply let go. Despite having started another relationship almost immediately, he continued to interfere in Claire's life in one way or another. Always under the pretext of being a good father. But it was obvious that he only wanted to maintain control. From the beginning, she warned me that her children might not be ready for her to have another relationship. Max is very angry, she told me one night as we walked through the park. With me, with his dad, with the whole world. And Lily, well, she just wants everyone to be happy. But she often ends up caught in the middle. I told myself I was prepared for that. After all, how hard could it be to win over a couple of teenagers? Spoiler alert. Much harder than I imagined. The first few months were relatively calm. Max avoided me completely, which, to be honest, was better than open hostility. Lily, on the other hand, was a ray of sunshine. She greeted me with shy hugs and nervous smiles every time I came to pick up Claire. There was something about her that made me want to protect her from the world. But even though Claire and I were incredibly happy together, Max became an increasing problem. At every family dinner Claire tried to organize, he would make passive-aggressive comments like, "I don't understand why we need another man in our lives," or, "I hope you like drama. Because there's plenty here." Claire tried to mediate, but it was obvious that he wasn't ready to accept me. Things came to a head on Thanksgiving. Claire had worked all day preparing an incredible dinner, mashed potatoes, stuffing, the whole combo. I had helped, although clearly my talent in the kitchen was limited. We invited some close friends, and the evening seemed to be going well until Max decided to ruin it all. In the middle of dinner, while we were talking about movies, he said loudly, "Sure, because having another man at our table is just what Mom needs. Did you like the play, Rick?" The silence that followed was deafening. Claire looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and pain. But before she could respond, Max stood up, threw his napkin on the floor, and left the house. It was at that moment that I knew our happiness wasn't going to be easy to build. After Thanksgiving, Claire decided that Max needed to talk to someone. She found a local therapist who worked with teenagers and convinced him to attend. He reluctantly agreed, and for a while I thought things would improve. But the changes were slow, and although I tried to stay positive, I was beginning to feel the weight of his resentment. Life went on with its ups and downs. But overall, Claire and I were building something beautiful. We got married in a small ceremony in our garden, with Lily as our bridesmaid. Max didn't attend. He decided to stay at a friend's house that day. And although Claire tried not to show it, I could see how much it hurt her. After the wedding, things became more tense. Now that we were officially a family, Max seemed determined to show me that I would never be part of his. All of this culminated on my birthday, when he decided to give me the most unexpected and cruel gift I could ever have imagined. Folks, before I continue, if you are enjoying these stories, please subscribe to the channel. We are almost reaching a very important goal of 1,000 subscribers. My birthday had always been a simple but special day. I've never been one for big parties or ostentatious gifts. For me, the important thing was to be surrounded by the people who meant something in my life. This year was going to be different, but in a way I could never have foreseen. Claire was excited to celebrate it. Despite all the stress with Max, she had gone to great lengths to plan a small gathering with close friends, some neighbors, and of course, the kids. Although I knew Max wouldn't be thrilled to join, I promised myself to stay calm. I didn't want to ruin the day with arguments or tension. The morning started quietly. Claire woke me up with a breakfast that she and Lily had prepared. And then they gave me a couple of gifts. Lily gave me an adorable drawing she had made, a cartoon version of our family. Even with Max included, I knew he wasn't going to want to pose for this, but I drew him anyway, she said, giggling, and I couldn't help but smile. Claire gave me a book I had mentioned months ago, something I wanted but had never taken the time to buy. The day went by without incident, which was already a success considering how things had been lately. The afternoon arrived, and with it the guests. Some friends brought food and drinks, and the atmosphere filled with laughter and lively chatter. It was one of those perfect nights where everything seemed to fit. Then, just after I cut the cake, Max appeared. I can't explain how surprised I was to see him. He had spent most of the day locked in his room, and honestly, I didn't expect him to come down at all. He was holding something in his hand, and although I couldn't make it out at first, I soon saw that it was an envelope. He walked towards me with a neutral, almost impassive expression. It was strange. There was no sarcasm, nor that defiant attitude he normally wore like armor. He extended the envelope towards me and simply said, "Happy birthday." The room fell silent. Claire looked at him with a mixture of astonishment and relief, clearly thinking that this was a gesture of reconciliation. Even I naively thought that perhaps this was a step towards something better. "Thanks, Max," I said with a smile, trying not to show how nervous I felt. I took the envelope, opened it, and pulled out the card. My smile disappeared as soon as I read the words written inside. It was a short message written in black ink that seemed to have been traced with force, as if each letter were charged with anger. The message read, "I hope you ruin your life like you ruined ours." The impact was like a punch to the chest. The room, which had been filled with laughter and joy moments before, fell into an uncomfortable silence. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, but I couldn't take my eyes off the message. My hands started to shake as I held the card. I didn't know what to say. Max's words were like a brutal confirmation of everything I had felt since I married Claire. That I would never be accepted. That I would always be the intruder in their family. Claire was the first to break the silence. "Max, what the hell is this?" Her voice was charged with disbelief and anger, something she rarely showed. But Max didn't flinch. He shrugged and said, "It's what I think. I'm not here to lie." I wanted to respond, to defend myself, to confront him, but I couldn't. I felt completely empty. Lily, who was sitting nearby, started to cry and ran out of the room. Claire was on the verge of tears too, but she stood firm. "This is unacceptable. Max, how can you be so cruel?" "Cruel?" he replied, finally showing some emotion. "You know what's cruel? You forcing me to live with this guy. You acting like we can be a happy family when it's all a lie. I can't stand it. Mom, he ruined everything." Before Claire could respond, Max turned and walked out of the house, leaving everyone in a state of shock. After that, the gathering quickly dissolved. The friends and neighbors who had attended tried to say goodbye politely, but the discomfort was palpable. Everyone knew that what had just happened was something that couldn't be ignored or fixed with quick words. Once we were alone, Claire tried to talk to me. "Rick, I'm so sorry. I don't know what's wrong with Max. There's no excuse for this. You don't have to apologize for him." "Claire," I said, though I couldn't hide the pain in my voice. "But this can't go on." That night was one of the longest of my life. I locked myself in our room, trying to process what had happened. The card was still on my mind, its words resonating over and over again. Was I really the villain in Max's story? Had I done something to deserve this level of hatred? The next day, Claire and I had a serious conversation. I told her that I loved her family, but that I couldn't continue living in such a toxic environment. Claire, though hurt, agreed. "He needs help, Rick, more than he's received so far. This isn't working, and I don't want you to end up being the scapegoat for all his problems." The conversation didn't solve anything immediately, but at least it was a start. Claire promised to talk to Max, but even she knew that this wasn't something that would be fixed overnight. The rest of the week was an emotional whirlwind. Max barely left his room. And when he did, he was cold towards both Claire and me. Lily, on the other hand, tried to stay close to me. Don't mind him, Rick, she told me one afternoon. He's angry at everything, not just you. Though her words were comforting, they didn't remove the weight of the situation. To my surprise, a few days later, Max asked to talk to Claire. I was home when it happened, but I stayed in the living room so as not to interfere. I heard raised voices at first, but eventually everything went quiet. When Claire came out, her face was a mixture of weariness and sadness. He says he's willing to try to talk to you, she said. I don't know if it will be easy, but at least it's a step. The day Max decided we would talk, I felt like I was waiting for a storm. There were too many emotions at play. I honestly didn't know if this conversation would be a way to fix things or simply the next chapter in a constant struggle. Claire had mediated so that we would both sit down alone. I'm going to stay close, but this moment has to be yours, she said before leaving us. Max arrived late to our meeting, which wasn't exactly a surprise. He plopped down on the couch across from me with his arms crossed and an expression of utter apathy. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me as if he were evaluating whether I was really worth his time. I tried to stay calm, although inside I felt like a knot was tightening in my chest. Thanks for coming to talk, Max, I began, trying to sound as neutral as possible. I know this isn't easy for you. And honestly, it isn't for me either. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes drifted towards the window. And after a few seconds that seemed like an eternity, he finally spoke. I don't know what you expect me to say. I don't think this will change anything. That hurt, but I took a deep breath and decided to remain calm. I don't expect this to change things immediately. I just want us to talk, for you to try to understand my perspective, and I yours. Max let out a sarcastic laugh. Your perspective? Sure, go ahead. Tell me how you feel being the guy who came into our lives and ruined everything. It wasn't just anger in his words anymore, it was pain. It was as if he had been carrying this burden for a long time and was now letting it out in the most destructive way possible. Despite everything, I understood that this was his attempt to communicate, even if it came wrapped in rage. Max, I know you don't want me here, I said, carefully choosing each word. I know that since I arrived you feel like I've taken something that was yours. But I want you to know something. It was never my intention to replace your dad or change the relationship you have with your mom. I love Claire, and all I want is for all of us to have a peaceful life. He shook his head in frustration. That's easy to say, but ever since you arrived, everything has been a disaster. My mom and I used to be okay. Not perfect, but okay. Now she's always defending you. Always in the middle trying to keep us from fighting. Everything is worse. His words hit me. It was clear that for Max, I was the symbol of everything that had gone wrong in his life. It wasn't just about me. It was about his parents' separation, the drastic change in his home, and the resentment that had grown like a giant shadow over him. Max, I understand you're angry, and I'm not going to say that everything has been easy for any of us. But I think part of this anger isn't really with me. I think there's a lot that's happened between your parents. Things that have deeply affected you. And I'm just the easiest person to blame. I don't need you to psychoanalyze me, he burst out, standing up. You don't know anything about what I've been through. Then tell me, Max, I replied, keeping calm, although I felt like I was walking on thin ice. Help me understand. Tell me what you feel. What you want. For a moment I thought he was going to leave. He stood there, breathing heavily, but finally sat down again. His shoulders were tense, and his eyes avoided mine. I want things to go back to the way they were. I want my dad to be here. I want my mom to stop acting like everything's fine when it's not. This wasn't just an attack on me. It was a cry for help. Max was trapped in the grief of a life that no longer existed. And I, no matter how hard I tried, could never fill that void. Max, I can't change the past, I said softly, and I can't be your dad. I'll never try to be. But I'm here because I love your mom. And because I care about you and Lily too. I'm not here to replace anything or anyone. I just want us to find a way to coexist because we're all in this together. He didn't answer, but he didn't get up or interrupt me either. I felt that he was at least listening to me, which was already progress. You don't have to accept me immediately, I continued, but I'd like you to give me the chance to show you that I'm not your enemy. Max remained silent for a long time. Finally, he murmured something I could barely hear. I don't know if I can do that. That's okay, I replied, but I'll be here if you decide to try. After that conversation, there wasn't a miraculous change, but I didn't expect one either. Max was still distant, but something in his attitude seemed less hostile. He still spent most of his time in his room, but he no longer made biting comments every time he saw me. Claire and I talked about what had happened that night. I think it's a good first step, she said, although she seemed tired. He's struggling, Rick, a lot, but I want to believe that he can get better. I wanted to believe it too, although I knew the road would be long. However, the following days brought a relative calm, something we hadn't had in months. Claire continued to encourage Max to go to therapy, and he, though reluctant, continued attending. Everything seemed to be moving forward, albeit slowly, until one day we received an unexpected call that changed the dynamic completely. It was Richard, Claire's ex. He was worried about Max. He wanted to talk to her about things he had heard regarding our family. According to Claire, he had started questioning Max about our home life, and apparently, Max had told him about the tensions between us. I don't know what he's up to, Claire told me, clearly nervous after the call. He always uses things like this to try to regain control. Richard's call was like an unexpected earthquake, shaking everything we had been trying to stabilize. Claire hung up the phone with an expression that mixed frustration, nervousness, and some fear. There was no need for her to tell me who it was. I had already heard enough about Richard to know that every time he appeared, something bad was about to happen. What did he want this time? I asked cautiously. He says he's worried about Max, Claire replied, dropping the phone on the table as if it burned her hands. Apparently, Max told him about the problems here at home, and now Richard is insinuating that he wants to intervene. My first reaction was anger. Intervene? After years of not caring about anything but himself? What right did he have now to interfere? Claire sighed and sat down, resting her head in her hands. I don't know, Rick, but Richard doesn't care about Max. He never has. He only cares about having power, controlling the narrative. He's probably using this as an excuse to try to destabilize us. Although I tried to support her, Richard's presence on the scene filled me with anxiety. I knew that even though Claire had managed to get out of her relationship with him, Richard always found ways to re-enter her life, whether through the children or through his own manipulations. 2 days after that call, Max dropped the bomb on us during dinner. In the midst of the usual uncomfortable silence, he dropped his fork on his plate and looked at us intently. Dad wants me to go live with him. The silence that followed was deafening. Claire froze, her face pale as paper. I didn't know what to say, but my mind was already racing, trying to understand how and why Richard had reached this point. What was all Claire managed to say? He says he has space for me, that it would be better for me to be with him, because here, it's toxic. He said the word with a deliberate tone, looking directly at me. It was obvious that he wanted to provoke a reaction. Claire finally found her voice. And you think that's a good idea? Max, you think that your dad, who has barely been present for the last few years, is suddenly the solution to all your problems? Max shrugged, clearly defensive. At least I don't have to put up with this. I don't have to pretend that we're a happy family when we're clearly not. I tried to intervene. Max, no one is asking you to pretend. We're working to improve things. But that takes time. Going with your dad isn't going to solve anything. How do you know that? He snapped. You don't know anything about my dad or me. I know because your dad isn't the hero you think he is. Claire replied firmly, her voice beginning to tremble. Don't get me wrong, Max, I love that you have a relationship with him. But you've forgotten what things were like when we lived together. How he treated me. How he treated you and Lily when things didn't go his way. Max got up from the table, his chair scraping the floor with a harsh noise. Maybe you hate him, but I'm not the one he treated like garbage. And now all I see is that you're defending Rick instead of me. It's always Rick. All you do is protect him. Never me. He left the room before either of us could respond. Claire sat in silence, staring at her plate as if searching for answers in it. I felt a mixture of frustration, sadness, and guilt. Was I really the problem? Had I done something to make Max feel displaced, even without realizing it? That night, Claire and I had a difficult conversation. She was on the verge of tears, struggling not to be overcome by despair. Rick, I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm losing my son. No matter how much I try to talk to him, he always clashes with me. And now Richard is putting his ideas in his head. I can't compete with that. This isn't a competition. Claire, I replied softly. Max is looking for something. Someone to cling to. And Richard is taking advantage of that void. But you haven't done anything wrong. You're trying to protect him, even when he doesn't see it. Claire nodded, but she didn't seem convinced. I don't want to lose him, Rick, but I also don't want him to get into an environment that I know isn't healthy. The idea of Max leaving with Richard was terrifying, not only because of the emotional impact on Claire but because it would mean that Richard would have one more tool to manipulate the situation. I knew that if Max moved in with his dad, it would be difficult for him to see the reality of who Richard was. The resentment towards Claire and me would only grow. 2 weeks later, Max packed a suitcase and went to live with Richard. Claire was devastated. She spent days locked in our room, crying silently. Lily tried to cheer her up, But even she seemed lost without her older brother in the house. For my part, I felt powerless. I wanted to fix things, find a way to bring Max back, but I knew there was nothing I could do. The time that followed was complicated. Although Max was technically living with Richard, things weren't as he expected. Claire tried to stay in contact with him, but his responses were curt and distant. However, every now and then, some of the truth would surface. Richard is starting to show his true colors again. Claire told me one day after talking to Max. He says he treats him like an adult, but in reality, he just uses him to run errands and clean the house. Max was starting to see reality. Although that seemed like a small ray of hope, it didn't change the fact that Claire felt broken. Her relationship with Max was still tense, and I felt like a stranger in the middle of an emotional battlefield. Weeks passed, and little by little life began to stabilize. Claire and I focused on Lily, making sure she didn't feel the weight of everything that was happening. Still, Max's absence was like a constant hole in our lives. It was then that something unexpected happened. One afternoon, Claire received a message from Max. It was short, just a few words, but enough to change the course of things. "Mom, I think I made a mistake." Max's message, though brief, marked a significant change. Claire read it aloud, her eyes filling with tears. She had waited for something like this for weeks, months even, but now that it had finally arrived, she didn't know how to respond. Neither did I. "Mom, I think I made a mistake." Claire wrote immediately. "Son, you can always talk to me. Tell me what's going on." Sending it was like throwing a bottle into the sea, hoping Max would respond. He didn't answer right away, but the wait, though painful, was tinged with hope. A few days later, Max finally agreed to talk to Claire in person. He invited her to lunch at their favorite place, a diner near his school where they used to go when he was a child. Although I offered to stay out of that initial conversation, Claire insisted that I attend. "It's important that you're there, Rick. If this is going to work, it has to be between the three of us." When Max arrived, he looked tired, as if he hadn't slept well in weeks. His clothes were wrinkled, and he wore an expression that alternated between anger and uncertainty. It wasn't easy for him to take this step, that was obvious. He sat across the table and avoided looking at me, focusing solely on Claire. "I'm here, but I don't know what you expect me to say," was the first thing out of his mouth. "I don't expect anything, Max," Claire said softly. "I just want to listen to you. That's all." Max sighed and looked out the window before speaking. "Dad isn't what I thought he'd be. At first, everything was fine. He told me I could do whatever I wanted, that I didn't have to follow so many rules. But after a while, he started to change. He doesn't even ask me how I'm doing anymore. He just wants me to do things for him, clean the house, bring him things from the supermarket, take care of his dog. And if I don't, he calls me ungrateful or says I'm just like you." He pointed at Claire with an accusing finger, but there was less force in his words than before. "Max, I'm so sorry," Claire said, reaching her hand across the table. "I knew this could happen, but I also knew you had to make your own decisions. I didn't want to force you to stay with me if you weren't happy." He pulled his hand away and finally looked at me, his gaze still full of distrust. "And you? Are you happy now? Do you feel vindicated?" His comment hurt me, but I understood that it came from a place of pain, not malice. I kept calm. "Max, I'm not here to say, 'I told you so.' I never wanted you to feel forced to accept me. I just wanted a chance to show you that I'm not your enemy. But I understand why you don't trust me, and that's why I'm here to try again, if you're willing." Max didn't answer immediately. He leaned back in his chair, drumming his fingers against the table. After a long silence, he said, "I don't know if I can trust you, but I'm willing to try." It was the closest thing to a truce we'd had, and although it wasn't a magic solution, I felt that there was finally a small chance to build something. Max came home a few days later. Although the first few weeks were awkward, you could tell he was making an effort. He no longer made sarcastic comments every time he entered a room. Although he still kept a certain distance, Claire and I decided that the process had to be slow. Forcing a relationship would only push him further away. To our surprise, it was Lily who helped break the ice. One afternoon while Claire was out, the three of us were in the living room. Lily was watching a superhero movie, and I sat down with her. Max entered the room, and although he seemed hesitant, he finally sat down too. "Is this the part where the bad guy wins?" he asked, pointing at the screen. "Not yet," Lily replied, smiling, "but almost." That small interaction opened a door that had been closed for months. From then on, Max started talking more, although at first it was only about trivial things: movies, music, school. Every little step forward felt like a monumental achievement. Claire also took important steps. She decided to attend therapy with Max, something he had suggested during one of their conversations. "I want us to talk about what happened with Dad and how I feel about you," He had told Claire, although it was difficult for her to accept some truths. She was determined to repair their relationship. Max also attended individual sessions. And little by little, he began to see things more clearly. He realized that his anger wasn't just with me or with Claire, but with the circumstances that had changed his life, his parents' separation, the arrival of a new father figure, and his own confusion about what it all meant. A few months later, my birthday arrived again. Claire asked me if I wanted to celebrate it, and although I was somewhat reluctant after the disaster of the previous year, I agreed. I invited some friends, and Claire, as always, prepared an incredible dinner. Lily made another drawing for me, and this time Max surprised me. He handed me an envelope, just like last year, but this time with a shy smile. "It's something small," he said, avoiding looking directly at me. I opened the card, and inside was a handwritten message. "I know I haven't always made it easy for you, but thanks for being here. Even when I didn't make it easy for you. Happy birthday." They were just a few words, but they meant the world to me. I looked at him and smiled. "Thanks, Max. This means a lot." He nodded and went back to his seat, clearly uncomfortable with all the attention. But I knew that moment was a giant step. There are still difficult days. The relationship with Max isn't perfect, and it probably never will be. But now there's something we didn't have before: hope. Max is learning to deal with his emotions. Claire is rebuilding her relationship with him, and I'm finding my place in this family, which, although imperfect, is mine. Story 3. My mother-in-law mocked my pathetic house. So I told her that her son was spending family money on unmentionable secrets. Now everything has fallen apart. Hi, Reddit. I don't know if I did right or wrong, but what I said at a family dinner has unleashed a disaster that no one saw coming. Now my mother-in-law blames me for ruining her family. My husband is trying to mediate, and I'm here wondering if I messed up or if I simply said what needed to be said. To give you some context, I've been married to my husband, Lucas, 35M, for 6 years. We have a solid relationship, but his family is complicated, to say the least. His mother, Irene, 65F, is the center of everything. She's a wealthy woman, one of those who make you feel like you're in an episode of The Real Housewives of somewhere. Irene is demanding, arrogant, and what's worse, obsessed with appearances. Ever since Lucas and I got married, she has never missed an opportunity to humiliate me in subtle ways. For example, commenting like, "Oh, darling, your dress is adorable. It reminds me of the one I wore 20 years ago." Or, "Oh, how cozy your house is. Although I'm sure with some effort you'll be able to make something bigger." She's the kind of person who smiles while stabbing you in the back. All of this exploded a few weeks ago when my husband and I organized a dinner to celebrate having completely paid off our first house. It's not a mansion, but it's ours, and it means the world to us. We invited Lucas's family to share the achievement, although I knew Irene would bring her bad mood with her. And boy, did she ever. From the moment she walked through the door, Irene had that air of superiority. She looked at our home as if she were inspecting a cheap motel. She didn't say much at first, but her expression said it all. "This is what you call an achievement?" Dinner started relatively calmly. Lucas was excited, sharing the details of how we had worked together to reach this milestone. Everyone seemed genuinely happy, except Irene. Then, mid-conversation, she dropped the comment that made my blood boil. "It's a quaint little house," she said, feigning a smile. "I suppose it's charming if you've never experienced anything better. Remember when my husband and I bought our first house? It was 3 times bigger than this. Of course, times were different, but still." Then she turned to Lucas and added, "I hope that someday you can aspire to more. Son, I wouldn't want you to settle." The atmosphere became tense, but no one said anything. Not even Lucas. I felt my hands trembling under the table. My husband gently squeezed my knee. A gesture I understood as, "Let it go." But I couldn't. Not this time. "It's funny that you mentioned that, Irene," I said, in the calmest voice I could muster. "Because while you're so worried about appearances, have you wondered what your eldest son is really spending the family money on?" The silence at the table was deafening. Irene looked at me with a mixture of surprise and fury, as if she couldn't decide whether she was more offended by my tone or by the fact that someone had the audacity to speak to her like that. "What are you insinuating?" she asked, her eyes piercing me like daggers. "I'm just saying," I continued, "that maybe you should pay more attention. Because I'm pretty sure the high-yield investments your son constantly mentions have nothing to do with stocks or real estate." Lucas nudged me under the table, but it was too late. I had said it, and in Irene's eyes, I saw something I had never seen before: doubt. Perhaps even fear. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she finally said, but her voice betrayed her certainty. "Well, Irene," I replied, taking a sip of wine to stay calm, "if you don't know what I'm talking about, Maybe you should ask. They say money can buy many things. But the truth always finds a way to come out. Dinner ended abruptly after that. Irene and the rest of the family left in silence, leaving Lucas and me sitting in the living room surrounded by empty plates and an air of tension you could cut with a knife. What the hell was that? Lucas asked me as soon as the door closed. I'm sorry, but I couldn't take it anymore. I replied, your mother needs to learn that she can't treat me like trash just because her bank account has more zeros than mine. Besides, I wasn't lying. What do you mean? He asked, his face confused. I sighed. It was time to tell him something I had discovered weeks before and had been keeping secret, waiting for the right moment to bring it to light. But I never imagined it would be in a context like this. Lucas looked at me with questioning eyes, and his tone hardened when he asked again, what do you mean you weren't lying? What do you know about Max? Max, Lucas's older brother, had always been the perfect son for Irene. He was the pride of the family, successful in business, married to a charming woman, father of 2 adorable children, and always ready to show off his luxurious lifestyle on Instagram. But behind all that glitter, there was something I had accidentally discovered a few weeks ago. I'm sorry I didn't tell you before. I began, feeling the pressure in the air increase. I didn't want to get involved in family problems, but I think now it's impossible to avoid it. Lucas crossed his arms, clearly frustrated, but waited for me to continue. Remember when I went to that charity dinner with Max and his wife, Chloe, because you were away on business? Yes, of course, he said, still frowning. What does that have to do with anything? Well, that night after the event, Max offered to take me home. Chloe was tired and left early, so it was just him and me in his car. Everything was fine until he took a detour and dropped me off in a neighborhood that clearly wasn't ours. Lucas frowned even more. Why did he do that? That's what I wondered too. But while I was waiting for an Uber to get back, I saw something I couldn't ignore. Max went into a building that clearly wasn't an office building. It was a nightclub, or something like that, but one of those that aren't exactly known for being discreet. I didn't say anything at the time, but something didn't add up. Lucas was processing my words, but he still seemed incredulous. And that's it? Maybe he had a meeting or wanted to grab a quick drink. You can't assume the worst. That's what I thought, I replied, but then I checked something. I remembered that I had left my shawl in his car that night. And when I went to get it the next day, I found something that left me in shock. I took out my phone and looked for a picture I had taken as proof. I showed him the image, a detailed bill from an account at the nightclub, with charges including bottles of champagne, private rooms, and, most damningly, a name. VIP service for Rachel. Lucas looked at the screen, incredulous. This doesn't mean anything. It could be a coincidence. It's not just that, I insisted. I did what anyone would do if they felt something was out of place. I searched the internet for the name of the place. And let's just say it's an exclusive club where people pay a lot of money for company. Doesn't it seem strange to you that Max was there spending thousands of dollars on something like that when Chloe was at home? Lucas ran a hand through his hair, visibly disturbed. I don't know what to say. I can't imagine Max doing something like that. Chloe adored him, adores him. If this is true, why didn't you say something? Because I didn't know how to handle it. I admitted, it's not something you can just casually drop. Besides, I didn't know if it was a recurring thing or a one-time mistake. I didn't have concrete proof beyond that bill. But what I do know is that Max is spending money on things he shouldn't. And if his mom wants to act like her family is perfect, I think she deserves to know the truth. Lucas remained silent for a long time. Finally, he exhaled in frustration. This is going to explode. You know, Irene isn't going to take it well. Max even less. If you say something, the whole family is going to turn against you. And what should I do? I asked, raising my voice slightly. Keep putting up with your mother belittling me while her eldest son lives a double life? Stay quiet while she insinuates that I'm a bad influence on you because I wasn't born into a rich family like hers? I'm not saying that, Lucas replied, softening his tone. I'm just saying that if this comes to light, there will be no going back. I got up from the couch and started pacing the living room, trying to calm down. What I don't understand, I finally said, is why your mother is always so obsessed with making me look bad. It's like everything I do is insufficient for her. And now, after what she said at dinner, I felt like enough was enough. Lucas stood up too and came closer to me. Look, he said, taking my hands, I understand how you feel. I know my mom can be complicated, but I want you to think about this with a cool head. If you decide to confront Irene or Max with this, make sure you're prepared for the consequences. Consequences like what? I asked, looking directly into his eyes. Like losing any chance of having a relationship with my family. He said with a sigh. I know that doesn't sound so bad now. But believe me, These things can get much more complicated than you imagine. I nodded, but in my mind, I had already made a decision. Irene had crossed the line too many times, and Max needed to be held accountable. I didn't know exactly how, but I knew I wasn't going to stay quiet much longer. That night, while Lucas slept, I opened my laptop and searched for more information about Max's recent activities. What I found was enough to confirm my suspicions and to know that this story was far from over. That night was long. Each internet search, each click on the results, took me deeper into the rabbit hole of Max's secrets. What I found wasn't just compromising, it was devastating. First, I confirmed that the nightclub where Max had been was known not only for its exclusivity but also for the deals made behind closed doors. There were discreet reviews in private forums, stories of businessmen spending fortunes to maintain their privacy, and a list of frequent clients leaked on a blog that, although deleted, still appeared in the cache. Guess who was on that list? Yes, Max. As if that wasn't enough, I discovered something even more worrying. Max had an account on a dating app exclusive to successful people. There were public photos of him, all carefully selected to show his most attractive and professional side. But the content of his private profile was what chilled me to the bone. Although I couldn't access everything without a membership, the profile descriptions matched someone clearly looking for discreet affairs. With that information in hand, my dilemma became more complicated. How was I going to tell Lucas? He was already angry with the idea that I was getting involved in family matters. But how could I ignore it? Irene had no qualms about belittling our life, our house, and our decisions while her perfect son played with fire. And Chloe, she didn't deserve this. No one does. The next morning, after a sleepless night, I finally made up my mind. While we were having breakfast, I showed Lucas what I had found. He didn't interrupt me while I spoke, but I could see the disbelief and tension growing on his face with each word. I can't believe it, he finally said, running a hand through his hair. Max has always been a bit arrogant, but this is something else. Exactly, I replied, pointing to my laptop screen. It's not just arrogance, Lucas. He's playing with his marriage, his family, and the money that Irene adores so much. But we can't say anything about this, he said quickly, not without more solid proof. If we show it to Irene or Chloe, he'll deny everything, and they'll end up doing what to us? I asked, frustrated, staying with our arms crossed while Max keeps doing whatever he wants. Lucas sighed. Give me some time to think. I don't want to rush this. This could blow up in our faces if we don't handle it right. The opportunity to talk came sooner than expected. That same afternoon, Irene showed up unexpectedly at our house. She came alone, with her characteristic air of superiority, as if her presence were a gift we should be grateful for. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said, crossing the threshold without waiting for an invitation. I just wanted to talk to Lucas about what happened last night. I knew she wasn't coming to apologize. Irene wasn't that type, so I decided to stay close, pretending to tidy the kitchen. To listen, Irene began after sitting on our sofa as if it were hers. I want you to talk to your wife. What she said at dinner was completely inappropriate. I understand that sometimes emotions get the better of us, but she needs to learn to respect her in-laws. Lucas looked towards the kitchen as if asking for my permission to speak. But I couldn't stay quiet. I went into the living room and sat across from Irene, looking her straight in the eye. Respect my in-laws? I repeated, trying to stay calm. How do you expect me to do that when you constantly disrespect me? Irene rolled her eyes. Please, don't be dramatic. I'm just telling the truth. And what I said about your house was an innocent comment. I don't know why you took it so personally. Because it wasn't innocent, I replied, and you know it wasn't. But if you want to talk about the truth, Irene, let's talk about the truth. What do you really know about Max and how he handles the family's finances? Her face hardened. What are you insinuating now? I'm just saying that maybe you should be more concerned about what Max is doing with his money than the size of our house. Lucas tried to intervene, but Irene was already seething. If you have something to say it right now, she demanded, because I'm not going to tolerate you throwing around baseless accusations. That's when I took out my phone and showed her the pictures of the club bill and Max's dating profile. Irene took the phone with trembling hands, scanning every detail while her face went from disbelief to pure fury. This is a misunderstanding, she said, but her voice lacked the firmness it usually had. Max would never do something like that. He's a responsible and loyal man. You're just trying to destroy him because you have problems with me. Do you really believe that? I replied, feeling the rage rise in my throat. Because this has nothing to do with you, Irene. This has to do with Max and what he's doing behind your back. You want to protect him? Fine, but don't expect me to. That night, Irene left our house without saying much more. But her face said it all. She was conflicted. On the one hand, she wanted to deny what she had seen. But on the other, she knew the facts were there in front of her. Lucas was tense, almost as much as I was. And we barely spoke after she left. I don't know what she's going to do with this, he finally said, but I feel like this is just the beginning. And he was right, because the next day, Lucas's phone started ringing nonstop. It was Chloe. Lucas's phone rang for the 4th time that morning. And when I saw Chloe's name on the screen, I knew something had been unleashed. Lucas hesitated a few seconds before answering. And when he did, his tone was cautious. "Chloe, everything okay?" he asked. Although we already knew the answer would be negative, what I heard was a torrent of words. An altered tone, almost on the verge of tears. Although I couldn't hear every detail of what Chloe was saying, I caught some key phrases. "It's true, I can't believe it, tell me this is a mistake." While Lucas tried to calm her down, I looked at him nervously, knowing that sooner or later the call would come to me. Finally, Chloe asked directly, "Was it her? Was it your wife who told Irene this? Was it your wife who found all of this?" Lucas looked at me, clearly uncomfortable. He covered the phone with one hand and whispered to me, "She wants to talk to you. Are you ready for this?" I nodded. I knew that even though it wasn't my responsibility, Chloe deserved answers. Lucas handed me the phone, and as soon as I brought it to my ear, I heard her trembling voice. "Is it true? Everything Irene told me, is it true?" Chloe began bluntly. "Max has been doing those things, you knew. And you didn't tell me?" I took a breath and tried to stay calm. "Chloe, I'm so sorry. I discovered some things by accident. But I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't want to hurt you without concrete proof." "Concrete proof?" "Irene showed me everything. The photos, the bills, the profile on that. How could he do this to me? Why didn't anyone tell me anything?" I felt her pain through the phone. Chloe had always been kind to me, the only one in the family who treated me as an equal. And now she was facing the truth that no one would want to hear. "I didn't want you to find out like this," I said, trying to comfort her. I thought Irene would deny it, or that Max would make excuses. I knew this would be devastating. "It is," she said, and then there was an uncomfortable silence. Finally, she added, "Thank you for not staying quiet. Even though it hurts, I prefer to know." That night, Chloe confronted Max. We weren't present, but the consequences came quickly. The next day, Lucas received a text message from Max. It was short, cold, and made his intentions clear. "I hope you're happy. You've let your wife destroy this family." Lucas read the message aloud and then let out a bitter laugh. "Sure, because it's our fault, not his. What did you expect?" I replied. "Max has always been your mother's favorite. And now that she knows the truth, he's going to try to blame us for everything. And you know what's worse?" Lucas said, "Max isn't scared of what Chloe thinks. He's worried about what Irene thinks of him." And he wasn't wrong. That afternoon, Irene arrived at our house unannounced, as seemed to be her style lately. This time, her attitude was different. There wasn't that air of superiority that usually accompanied her, but a mixture of anger and despair. "Lucas, we need to talk," she said as soon as she walked through the door. She glanced at me quickly but clearly wasn't interested in addressing me. "If this is about Max," Lucas began, "we've already said everything we had to say. It is about Max," Irene admitted, sitting on the sofa with a sigh. "But it's also about what your wife has done to this family." There it was, the accusation I was expecting. "No, Mom," Lucas said firmly, "don't put this on her. Max is the one who got himself into this mess. She just uncovered the truth. And what did you gain from that?" Irene retorted, raising her voice. "Chloe is devastated, the children are confused, and Max is on the verge of losing everything he's built." "Everything he's built?" I replied. "You mean his image of the perfect son? Because everything else was built by Chloe while he played at being a single man." Irene glared at me. "You have no right to talk about my son like that. He's a successful businessman, a dedicated father, and an unfaithful husband." I interrupted. "That's what he is, and if you can't accept it, that's your problem, but I'm not going to let you keep blaming me for his mistakes." After that, Irene left, furious, and I knew things would never be the same again. Lucas agreed. "I don't know if Mom will ever forgive this," he said as he cleared the dinner plates. "And honestly, I'm not sure I want her to." That night, I received a message from Chloe. It was brief, but it meant a lot. "Thank you. I'm starting to understand a lot of things. I'll let you know how things turn out." For the first time since all of this started, I felt that maybe, just maybe, it had been worth it. The following days were a whirlwind. Chloe had temporarily moved into her parents' house with the children, leaving Max alone in the enormous mansion that had always served as a trophy for his success. Irene, for her part, was clearly torn between supporting her favorite son and keeping the facade of the perfect family intact. For Lucas and me, the tension in the air was almost unbearable. The real earthquake came when Chloe decided to speak publicly. She didn't do it directly on social media or with a scandal, but within her closest circle. She made it clear that she was considering divorce and that Max's behavior was not something she could tolerate in a community as closed and elitist as theirs, where reputation was everything. This rumor became the center of all conversations. One night, while Lucas and I were having dinner, his phone started vibrating insistently. It was message after message from Irene, followed by a call. "Are you going to answer?" I asked, knowing that it was probably another outburst of anger or despair. Lucas shook his head. "No, I'm sick of all this. If she just wants to yell or blame you again, I'm not going to listen." The phone stopped ringing, but a few minutes later, someone knocked on our door. We knew who it was before we opened it. Irene was standing there in her impeccable beige coat, but this time her face showed something different. There was no anger, but concern. "Can I come in?" she asked, her tone less aggressive than usual, which was already a surprising change. Lucas let her in, although we were both tense. Irene sat on the sofa, slowly took off her coat, and then looked at me. "I want to know something," she said directly. "When you decided to expose Max, did you think about what you would do to this family?" "I didn't expose him for fun," I replied, trying to stay calm. "Max exposed this family by acting the way he did. I just stumbled upon the truth." "And Chloe?" she asked, her voice lower. "What do you think she's going to do?" I shrugged. "I don't know, Irene, but I think she has the right to decide what to do with her life now that she knows what's happened." Irene sighed and leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. It was the first time I had seen her like this, vulnerable. "Max has always been complicated," she admitted, carefully choosing her words. "His father and I gave him everything he wanted, but we never thought about the consequences. And now, I feel like everything is falling apart." Lucas looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and compassion. "Mom, you can't keep protecting him. This isn't anyone's fault but Max's. You and Dad gave him everything." "Yes, but you also raised him to believe that the rules don't apply to him." "And what do you want me to do now?" she asked, almost desperately. "Abandon him? Leave him to face this alone?" Lucas sighed. "I want you to confront him. I want you to look at him like an adult and tell him that what he did was wrong. But more than that, I want you to stop blaming others for his mistakes. This isn't my wife's fault. This isn't Chloe's fault. It's Max's." That conversation marked a change. Although Irene didn't openly admit it, she seemed to be starting to accept that Max had to face the consequences of his actions. Days later, Max called Lucas, not to apologize, of course, but to lash out at us. "Thanks to you, Chloe left me," he began, his tone full of resentment. "I hope you're happy." Lucas didn't hold back this time. "No, Max, Chloe left you because you acted like a jerk. And if you expect anyone here to support you without questioning you, you're talking to the wrong person." There was a long silence before Max spoke again. "And Mom? What does she say?" "She says she's tired," Lucas replied, "and I think she's finally starting to see who you really are." Max hung up after that, and we didn't hear from him for weeks. Meanwhile, Chloe went ahead with the divorce proceedings. Lucas and I supported her as best we could, although she made it clear that she expected nothing from us. "I just want to thank you," she told us in a message one night. "Without you, I would still be living a lie." Although that gave me some peace, it also left me with a bittersweet feeling. I didn't want to be the cause of anyone's pain, but I knew the truth was necessary. Story 4. My ex-husband, who left our family to pursue his dream life, reappeared years later, broke and begging for reconciliation. I slammed the door in his face. My story begins over a decade ago in Atlanta, Georgia. My name is Jessica. I am 34 years old, and the life I have now is very different from the one I imagined when I was 20. I married young, to Matthew, who was 24 at the time and seemed to be the perfect man. He was charismatic, dreamy, and always talked about building a future together that would be worthy of a fairy tale. Matthew and I met while working at a local coffee shop near the university where I was studying art. He was a waiter and had a charm that made everyone in the coffee shop adore him. When we started dating, his energy seemed contagious. He talked about his big plans, wanting to open his own graphic design agency, travel the world, and someday retire early to live on a sustainable farm. He seemed like a man with vision. After 2 years together, we got married in a small ceremony in Savannah with only our closest friends and family. The first few years were good. We lived modestly, but we were happy. I taught art at an elementary school, and he had started working as a freelancer for small businesses, designing logos and websites. We did not earn much money, but I always believed in him and his dream. However, everything started to change when our first son, Oliver, was born. Although we were both excited about the baby's arrival, Matthew seemed more worried than excited. He constantly complained about how difficult it was to balance his freelance projects with the responsibilities of being a father. He said he needed space to breathe and time to focus on his career. Instead of adapting, he began to spend more time away from home. He said he was working on new projects, but his income did not reflect what he claimed. I took on more responsibilities at home, caring for Oliver and juggling my job. I tried to be understanding, reminding myself that he was making sacrifices to give us a better future. One day, he came home with news that changed everything. He told me that he had received an offer to work with a small but promising design agency in Los Angeles. It was his big opportunity. The agency could not offer him much money at first, but he insisted that it was a stepping stone to his dream. What I will never forget is how he presented it as if it were a decision he had already made without me. I asked him how he planned to handle our situation. Would he move alone? How did Oliver and I fit into this? Matthew looked at me almost impatiently and said, "I just need a few months to settle in. Then I will bring you two over there. It is going to be great. Just trust me." At first, I tried to support him. I thought maybe I was being selfish by questioning his decision. But those months turned into a year. Then two. At first, we talked almost every day on the phone. But the calls became less frequent. When I tried to talk about how he could help us financially from afar, he always had excuses. "This month has been slow. Rent in LA is expensive. Soon I will have a big client." Eventually, he stopped sending money altogether. Meanwhile, my life went on in Atlanta. I continued teaching art, but I had to start working overtime to keep us afloat. My mother helped me with Oliver when she could, but it was clear I was alone in this. The worst was when I discovered through social media that Matthew was living a completely different life than the one he had told me about. One night, while Oliver was sleeping, I decided to check Matthew's Instagram, something I rarely did because I always felt worse after doing so. There, I found pictures of him at glamorous parties, surrounded by people who looked like models, drinking cocktails in elegant Los Angeles bars. In one of the photos, he was hugging a blonde woman in a tight dress and a smile that seemed to shout, "Victory." My heart sank. That woman was not just a friend or colleague. It was evident that it was something more. When I confronted him about it, he denied everything at first, but finally admitted that he was dating someone else. His justification was almost comically absurd. "The distance has changed us. We are different people now. I think we need to let this go. It is best for everyone." I could not believe what I was hearing. We had promised to build a life together, and now he was simply leaving everything behind because it did not fit into his new vision. I was furious, but more than anything, I was devastated. The following months were a mix of confusion, anger, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. Matthew made it clear that he had no intention of returning to Atlanta or maintaining regular contact with Oliver. In fact, before continuing, if you are enjoying the stories, please subscribe to the channel. We are almost reaching a very important goal of 1,000 subscribers. It seemed he wanted to get rid of any responsibility that linked him to our life. Just a few days after his confession, he sent me divorce papers. It was as if he wanted to erase his past as quickly as possible. At first, I did not know how to proceed. We did not have much money for lawyers, and he knew that. That is why, in the initial agreement he presented, he practically washed his hands of any financial obligation to Oliver and me. He said he could not afford to pay child support because he was struggling financially. However, the photos on social media showed something different: trips, expensive dinners, even a new sports car. I was exhausted, but I was not going to let him leave us with nothing. I decided to fight. I asked my family for help and sought a lawyer specializing in divorce and custody cases. It was not easy, and the legal battles stretched for over a year. Matthew always found ways to delay the process, and I had to listen to his constant excuses. "The judicial system is against men. I cannot pay child support because I need to reinvest in my business." Or even, "You wanted to have Oliver, not me." Finally, I got an agreement that at least ensured that I would receive a small monthly amount to cover our son's basic expenses. It was not much, but it was something. More importantly, I obtained full custody of Oliver. Matthew seemed completely indifferent. At one point, he even told me, "Do what you want with the child. It is better this way for everyone." That was like a dagger to the heart. How could he be so cold with his own son? The following years were hard but also full of small triumphs. I moved to a smaller apartment and worked several jobs to support us. Oliver and I built a routine, and eventually, we managed to find stability. My son grew up knowing that his mother would do anything for him. And although sometimes he asked about his dad, I learned to answer with honesty and love. Dad is busy with his own life. But we will always have each other. Despite everything, I never tried to prevent Matthew from communicating with Oliver. Even after everything he did, I kept the door open for him to have a relationship with his son if he wished. But the calls never came. Oliver's birthdays passed without a card. A message. Nothing. Matthew had completely erased himself from our lives. However, life went on. As the years passed, things improved. I got a better job as an art coordinator at a local gallery. And Oliver started excelling in school. I felt proud of what we had built together. And although my heart still carried the scars of what Matthew had done, I was learning to heal. We had a quiet and happy life. And that was all we needed. Then, everything changed one summer afternoon just a few weeks ago. It was a typical day until I heard the doorbell. Oliver was at summer camp, and I was enjoying a rare moment of tranquility with a book and a cup of tea. I got up to open it, expecting it to be a delivery person or maybe a neighbor. But when I opened the door, I froze. There stood Matthew, standing on the porch. His appearance was a total shock compared to the man I remembered. His hair was messy, his clothes wrinkled, and his expression desperate. For a moment, I thought it was a bad dream. It had been almost 7 years since the last time I saw him in person. And what I had in front of me was not the charming and self-assured man I once loved. "Jess," he said, his voice trembling, "I know I am probably not welcome here, but I need to talk to you. Please." I wanted to slam the door in his face immediately, but curiosity and shock paralyzed me. I remained silent while he began to speak quickly, as if he feared I would throw him out before he finished. "I have lost everything," he confessed, his eyes full of tears. "My business failed, I cannot pay the rent, and the woman I was with left me. I have nowhere to go. I thought of you and Oliver and what we used to have. I know I made mistakes, but I am here to fix things. I want to be a part of your lives again." For a moment, I did not know how to respond. His words were like a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The part of me that once loved him wanted to feel sorry. I wanted to give him the chance to redeem himself. But the other part, the one that had worked tirelessly to pick up the pieces he left behind, wanted to yell at him and kick him out of my house. I took a deep breath and said to him as calmly as possible, "I do not know what you expect. Matthew, you abandoned us, Oliver and me. Now, after all these years, you simply expect us to welcome you back because your life fell apart? It does not work that way." His face contracted in a mix of regret and frustration. "Jess, I did not know what I was doing back then. I was young and stupid. But now I know. Please let me show you that I have changed. Let me be a part of Oliver's life. I need this." I stared at him, feeling the contained anger that had been buried for years. "You need this? What about what Oliver needed all these years? He needed a father, and you were not there. I do not need you. And neither does he." Before he could respond, I closed the door in his face. I stood there for a moment, trembling, feeling the adrenaline rush through my body. I looked out the window and saw Matthew standing there, knocking softly and pleading, but I did not let him in. After a few minutes, he finally left. After closing the door, I felt a mix of emotions that was difficult to process. On one hand, I was proud of having stood my ground, of not allowing him to simply walk back into our lives as if nothing had happened. But on the other hand, I felt a kind of emptiness, a sadness that I could not ignore. There was something deeply unsettling about seeing him so defeated, so different from the man I remembered, even if it was the same man who abandoned us without looking back. That night, I could not sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, thinking about what had just happened. Should I have listened to him? Was I being too harsh? But then I remembered all the nights I spent crying when Oliver asked why his dad did not call him on his birthday. Or the times I had to explain why we could not afford simple things like a vacation. No, I thought, I should not feel sorry for him. He made his decisions, and now he was living with the consequences. The next day, everything seemed a little surreal, as if Matthew's visit had been a bad dream. I decided not to say anything to Oliver, at least for now. I was afraid that reopening that wound would cause him more harm than good. However, I knew that this situation was not over. Knowing Matthew, I was sure he would try again. And I was right. A few days later, I was picking up Oliver from summer camp when I noticed a car parked across the street, not far from our house. It was old and quite run down, but I recognized Matthew sitting in the driver's seat. My heart raced. He was watching me, and she knew all the details of our story. "Jess, you have to set a clear limit," she told me. "If he is starting to harass you, you cannot ignore it. Have you thought about calling the police?" At that moment, I was not sure I wanted to take things to that level. Part of me still hesitated, thinking that maybe I was being too hard on him. I decided that if he was still parked there the next day, I would confront the situation more directly. The following day, Matthew's car was indeed still there. I was furious. I opened the front door and walked directly towards him. I had not planned what I was going to say, but I knew I needed to make things clear. "What the hell do you think you are doing? Matthew? I said, knocking on his car window. He slowly lowered the window, looking more dejected than ever. Jess, I just want to talk. Please, I cannot leave things like this, he said in a broken voice. Talk? Talk about what? About how you abandoned your son. And now you expect me to welcome you with open arms because your life is a mess? This does not work that way. You are not welcome here. Matthew, I made that clear, I replied, crossing my arms. Just give me a chance. He pleaded. I know I cannot change the past, but I am willing to do whatever it takes to show you that I have changed. Please, Jess, I have no one else. That last part hit me harder than I expected. As much as I wanted to hate him, there was something pathetic and human in his plea that made me hesitate. Even if only a little. But then I remembered everything that had happened. Everything I had done to rebuild my life without him. This is not about you, Matthew. It is not about your needs or your problems. This is my life and Oliver's, and you decided not to be a part of it. Now go. If you do not, I will call the police, I said firmly. For a moment, it seemed he was going to protest, but he finally nodded slowly. Okay, I will go, he murmured, but I am not finished trying to fix this. I watched him start the car and drive away, but his warning lingered in my mind. What did he mean by, not finished trying to fix this? What more could he try? I knew I needed to prepare for what was coming. That night, after reflecting, I decided that I could no longer handle this alone. I called my lawyer, someone I had not spoken to in years, and explained the situation. He was clear. If Matthew continued appearing without my consent, I should consider applying for a restraining order. It's important to protect not only your well-being but also your son's. He said, this type of behavior can escalate if not controlled. I did not want to reach that point, but I also knew that I had to prioritize my family's stability and safety. I had worked too hard to build the life we had now to allow Matthew to crumble it again with his problems. During the following days, I tried to resume my normal routine, but it was impossible to ignore the growing anxiety I felt. I looked out the windows more often than usual and checked the neighborhood every time I left the house. There were no signs of Matthew, but I knew I could not trust his promise to leave. Something in his last sentence, I am not finished trying to fix this, made me think he was planning something else. To make matters worse, Oliver started to notice that I was more distracted and tense. One afternoon, while we were watching a movie, he asked me, Mom, are you okay? You seem worried lately. His concern broke my heart. I had always tried to be strong in front of him, but it was evident that my nervousness was affecting him. I decided it was time to tell him at least part of what was going on. Oliver, there is something I want to talk to you about. I began, pausing the movie. Your dad, well, he showed up a few days ago. He says he wants to see you and be back in our lives. His eyes widened in surprise, and then he frowned as if processing what he had just heard. My dad? After all this time? Why now? That is what I am wondering too, I said, sighing. I know this can be confusing, and I want you to know that you do not have to make any decisions now. But I want you to understand something important. I will always be here to protect you. No matter what happens, if you do not feel comfortable with the idea of seeing him, you do not have to. Oliver remained silent for a moment, playing with the edge of his blanket. Finally, he said, I do not know if I want to see him. I always thought he did not care about us. Why should we care about him now? I wanted to tell him that he was absolutely right, but I did not want to influence his emotions more than necessary. It is okay if you feel that way. I just want you to know that your feelings are valid, and you do not have to rush to decide anything. That conversation reaffirmed that I was doing the right thing by keeping Matthew out of our lives. But it also filled me with sadness. It was not fair that Oliver had to deal with this kind of emotional uncertainty at his young age. A couple of days later, the silence ended. One afternoon while I was at work, I received an unexpected call from my sister. Her voice sounded alarmed. Jessica, you have to come home right now. Matthew is at your door again, and it does not look like he plans to leave. Panic seized me. I left what I was doing and rushed home. When I arrived, I saw Matthew's car parked in front of the house and him sitting on the porch steps. He looked even more deteriorated than the last time I saw him. And he was holding a folder full of papers. I got out of the car with determination. Before I could say anything, he quickly stood up, raising his hands as if to show that he had no bad intentions. Jessica, please listen to me, he began. I just want to talk. I have brought proof that I am making an effort to change. I have been looking for a job, attending therapy. I even talked to a lawyer about how I could support Oliver. Even with small contributions at first. I looked at him incredulously. And why should I believe you now? Matthew, what makes you think that you can repair years of abandonment with a few papers and empty promises? Because I have no other option, he replied with heartbreaking sincerity in his voice. I know I have been a mess. I know I failed you and Oliver. But I am trying to be better. I want to do it right this time, even if it is late. For a brief moment, I felt something resembling compassion. But then I remembered everything that had happened to get to this point. And my resolve hardened. Matthew, you cannot show up here and expect me to simply give you a second chance. Trust does not work that way. Years passed, and you did not make the slightest effort to be in Oliver's life. I have no reason to believe you. Now just, let me talk to him. Please, he begged. If you do not want to forgive me, that's okay, but he deserves to listen. Let me explain my side of things. No, I said firmly. Oliver does not deserve to go through the trauma of facing someone who left him without a single explanation. If you really want to fix something, start by respecting my boundaries. And my boundary is this: do not come back here. If you do, I will take legal action. Matthew seemed to shrink at my words. For a moment, I thought he was going to protest, but he simply nodded slowly. Okay, I understand, he said quietly. I watched him get into his car and drive away. A part of me felt guilty, but I knew I had done the right thing. Oliver and I had worked too hard to build a stable life, and I could not allow Matthew to destroy that with his problems. That night, after putting Oliver to bed, I sat down with my computer and started researching restraining orders. I knew I could not just wait for Matthew to reappear. I had to take steps to protect us, not only physically but also emotionally. I called my lawyer the next day to begin the process. Meanwhile, I spoke with Oliver's school and asked them not to allow anyone outside of my approved list to pick him up. I also informed them about the situation so they could be vigilant. I did not want to live in fear, but I knew I had to be proactive. This was not the life I had planned, but I would do whatever it took to keep my son safe and our peace intact. After initiating the paperwork for the restraining order, I began to feel a kind of relief. Finally, I was taking concrete steps to protect us, but I could not ignore the constant knot in my stomach. Although Matthew had not reappeared after our last confrontation, I had learned not to underestimate him. He always found ways to create chaos, and I feared that this time would be no different. One afternoon, a few weeks after I had filed the application, I received a call from my lawyer. The restraining order was almost ready, but he warned me that to be effective, it needed to be formally served to Matthew. This meant that he would have to officially find out that he could not come near us, which could trigger another unpredictable reaction on his part. Jessica, I want you to be prepared, my lawyer said. This might enrage him, but it is necessary. If he tries to contact you after receiving it, you will have full legal backing to act. But in the meantime, make sure you stay alert. That night, I sat with Oliver and had another difficult conversation with him. I explained in terms he could understand that his dad was not allowed to come near us, and that if he ever saw him near the school or the house, he should tell me immediately. Why does he keep bothering us? He asked with a mix of confusion and sadness. If he did not want to be with us before, why now? I did not have a clear answer. I do not know. Honey, sometimes people make bad decisions and then regret them, but it is not your job to fix that. My job is to protect us, and that is what I am doing. Oliver nodded slowly, although I could see he was still struggling to understand it all. I promised myself that I would do everything possible to ensure that his life remained as normal and happy as possible despite the problems Matthew was causing. A few days later, something happened that changed everything. I was at home organizing some papers when I heard the doorbell. My first instinct was to ignore it. But when I peeked out the window, I saw two men in suits. Opening the door, one of them introduced himself as a court officer. He handed me a folder and explained that it was a summons. A summons? I asked, feeling a surge of anxiety. For what? Your ex-husband, Matthew, has filed a lawsuit to establish visitation rights with his son. The officer explained. My head began to spin. Matthew was suing me to gain access to Oliver. I could not believe it. He could barely support himself, and now he was trying to force his way into our lives through a court. I took the folder and closed the door, sitting down at the kitchen table as I tried to assimilate what had just happened. I opened the documents and read Matthew's demands. He stated that he wanted supervised visits with Oliver and that he was willing to undergo psychological and economic stability evaluations to prove he could be a responsible father. On the one hand, this seemed like a desperate attempt to fix his image. On the other, it was a tactic that could greatly complicate our lives. I immediately called my lawyer to explain what had happened. He assured me that this was not unusual in situations like ours and that with Matthew's history of abandonment, we had a strong case to prevent him from having any access. Jessica, this will be a fight, he said, but remember, you are in a strong position. The court prioritizes the well-being of the child, and it is clear that Oliver has been better off without his biological father in his life. That night I could barely sleep. I could not help but worry about what this new legal battle meant. Not only for me but also for Oliver. How would it affect him emotionally to have to relive all of this in such a public and formal setting as a court? The first hearing came quickly. I was nervous as I entered the courtroom with my lawyer. Matthew was there, dressed surprisingly formally. Although he still looked exhausted and disheveled, I could not help but feel a mix of anger and sadness seeing him. Why had he not made this effort before, when it really mattered? During the hearing, Matthew tried to present himself as a changed man. He talked about how he had started attending therapy and had found a stable job at a small local company. He said he just wanted the opportunity to be a part of his son's life and prove that he could be a good father. My lawyer presented a strong case in my defense, pointing out the years of abandonment and Matthew's total lack of financial or emotional support for Oliver. He also highlighted how his sudden return had caused a great disturbance in our lives, especially for my son, who had already found stability without him. When it was my turn to speak, I was honest with the judge. I explained how I had worked tirelessly to provide a stable and happy life for Oliver and how I feared that reintroducing Matthew would only cause more harm. My son has thrived without him, I said, my voice trembling slightly. It is not fair that he should relive the abandonment and emotional confusion that Matthew left behind just because he has now decided that he wants to try. Oliver deserves more than that. The judge listened attentively, and although he did not issue an immediate ruling, he made it clear that Matthew's demands would not be taken lightly. I left the courtroom feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. I knew this was not over, but at least I had taken the first step to protect my son. Finally, after several weeks of hearings and testimonies, the judge made a decision. Matthew did not get the visitation rights he sought. The court determined that given his history and Oliver's current stability, allowing him access was not in the child's best interest. I felt relieved but also emotionally exhausted, although I knew Matthew might try something else in the future. For now, we had peace. That night, as I cuddled Oliver before bed, I felt a surge of gratitude for everything we had managed to overcome together. This time, I was sure that I would not let anyone endanger our life again. We had fought too hard to get here. The chapter with Matthew, at least for now, was closed. Story 5. My brother married my best friend, and he wanted me to give a speech about how perfect they were. Even though she left me for him, I refused, so he called me petty and threatened not to invite me. Now they are begging me to babysit their child. Hi Reddit. Before I get into it, I want to say that this is not something I would normally share in a public forum. But I am so confused and frustrated that I need to hear other opinions. Did I go too far? Or can my brother simply not accept that not everything revolves around him? Here we go. I am 27 years old, female, and my older brother, Ryan, 30, male, has always been the family favorite. To be fair, I do not blame them. He is charming, charismatic, and has always known how to get his way. But over the years, that has meant that his needs and desires always came before everyone else's. Especially mine. The real bomb exploded about 5 years ago. I had a best friend, Lisa. Since we were 15, we were inseparable. She knew all my secrets, my insecurities, even those things you swear never to tell another soul. Lisa and I were like sisters. Or so I thought. Then she met Ryan. We were at a family gathering, and Lisa had come as my +1. She and Ryan connected almost immediately. I remember thinking it was funny at first because Ryan was the typical popular guy, and Lisa was more introverted. But something in the way he looked at her that night made me uncomfortable. After that, things changed. Lisa stopped responding to my messages. She was always busy or tired, or getting a lot done at work. I felt hurt, but I did not want to be the needy friend, so I gave her space. It was a mistake. A month later, Ryan confessed to me that he had been secretly dating Lisa since that gathering. I did not want to hurt you, he said. Sure, because dating my best friend behind my back was not going to affect me at all. Of course, I exploded. I felt like my trust had been completely betrayed. Not only by Lisa but also by Ryan. But the worst part was that neither of them seemed to understand why I was so angry. You cannot control who people fall in love with, Lisa said. Ryan simply accused me of being immature and jealous, as if I had some kind of irrational claim on her. I stopped talking to both of them for months. My family, on the other hand, was thrilled. Lisa was perfect for Ryan. According to my mother, they always said Ryan needed someone to keep him grounded. And apparently, Lisa fit that role perfectly. It did not matter how I felt. It never did. After a while, I tried to move on. Not because I was okay with the situation but because I felt I had no choice. Ryan and Lisa got engaged 2 years later. By then, I had rebuilt something resembling a relationship with them. But it was not the same. Ryan was my brother. And Lisa, well, I do not know what she was. But she certainly was not my friend. Despite that, I decided to be cordial. I did not want to cause drama in the family. The real conflict began when Ryan asked me to be his man of honor. Like the best man, but for him. Honestly, it took me by surprise. I did not expect him to include me in the wedding in such a prominent way. Especially considering our history. He said they wanted to repair what had been broken between us. I admit I was touched. I accepted, albeit with some hesitation. But then, as always, came the catch. Oh, and about the speech. He said casually a week later. Lisa and I thought it would be great if you talked about our story from your perspective. Since you were the one who introduced us. Makes a lot of sense. Right? Excuse me? They wanted me to stand in front of a room full of people and talk about how wonderful their relationship is when it literally began with both of them stabbing me in the back. I tried to be reasonable. I told Ryan that I felt uncomfortable doing that. But he insisted, saying it would be mature of me and that Lisa would really appreciate the gesture. This turned into a massive fight. Ryan called me selfish, saying it was the most important day of his life and that I was only thinking of myself. When I suggested that maybe he should find someone else for that role, he threatened not to invite me to the wedding at all. It was a disaster. I am going to stop here because, honestly, this is just the beginning. The situation took turns I could not have even imagined. To be continued because this gets worse before it gets better. If it gets better. Okay, here is the continuation because things really did get much more complicated. Get ready because this drama is worthy of a cheap movie. The kind you see on TV at 3 in the afternoon. After our argument about the speech, I stopped responding to Ryan's messages for a few days. Honestly, I needed a break. I felt like I was losing my mind. Was I really as selfish as he said? Should I have just agreed to give the damn speech and pretend everything was okay? But every time I thought about it, I remembered all the nights I cried over losing my best friend. And the anger returned. No, I could not do it. I was not going to lie about how I saw their relationship just to make them happy. Then, a few days later, my mom called. I knew it immediately. Ryan had complained to her. Like I said before, he has always been the favorite. So I was already prepared for her to take his side. What I did not expect was for her to accuse me of ruining the wedding before it even began. Seriously, Annie? She said, using that condescending tone she uses when she wants to manipulate me. Your brother asked you a favor. And you cannot put your feelings aside for one day? It's his wedding. How hard can it be? I tried to explain. I told her that I was not against attending. But the speech was too much. I reminded her how Lisa and Ryan had treated me at the beginning of their relationship. How they shut me out of their lives when I needed them most. But, of course, to my mom, those were things of the past. You cannot keep holding on to that. She said, family is more important. Family is more important? Where was that mentality when my brother and best friend betrayed me? But no matter how I tried to defend myself, she kept coming back to the same thing. It is his special day. Do not make this about you. By the time I finished that call, I was shaking with rage. I felt like my whole world was turning against me. Ryan and Lisa were the protagonists of this story. And I was just a footnote. I decided to send Ryan a message saying that I no longer wanted to be a part of the wedding as his man of honor. I did not want drama. I simply wanted to step aside. Of course, it was not going to be that easy. Ryan called me just a few minutes after receiving my message. He had not yelled this much since we were kids and I accidentally broke his video game console. What the hell, Annie? Seriously? You are going to do this now? You know what this means to Lisa. She wanted you to be a part of this. Why are you being so immature? Why am I being immature? I replied, finally letting it all out. Ryan, you and Lisa betrayed me. You stopped talking to me. You shut me out. And now you expect me to stand in front of everyone and say how happy I am that you are together? Do you really not see how absurd that sounds? He was silent for a moment. And for a second, I thought maybe he finally understood. But no. Instead, he said something that left me frozen. Well, maybe if you had not been such a bad friend, Lisa would not have felt the need to distance herself from you. Boom. There it was. It was all my fault. According to him, all the anger and resentment I had repressed for years exploded. I yelled at him that I did not want to talk to him again and hung up. I was shaking, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to cry for everything that had happened. The worst part is that even though I had decided to step away from the wedding, things did not stop there. My mom kept calling me, texting me, even showing up at my house one day to try to change my mind. Your grandmother is so excited to see you at the wedding. She said, are you going to disappoint her too? They used every possible tactic to manipulate me. But I stood firm. Then came the wedding day. I did not go. I simply could not do it. Instead, I turned off my phone, bought a bottle of cheap wine, and watched Netflix series all day. It was sad, but at least I did not have to face the drama. I thought that would be the end of it. I could not have been more wrong. A week later, I received a message from Lisa. I did not expect it at all, especially since we had not spoken directly since all this mess started. The message said something like, "Hey Annie, I know things between us have not been easy, but I really wanted you to be there. I missed you a lot on the wedding day. Can we talk? Talk about what, exactly? About how she left me for my brother. About how they both pretended I was the problem." I did not know what to answer. Part of me wanted to ignore her, but another part, a small part, wanted to hear what she had to say. Maybe she would finally give me an apology. I decided to respond. I do not know why, but I felt like I needed to close that chapter. For better or for worse. I told her we could talk, but she needed to be honest with me. Do not come to me with excuses. I wrote, "If you are going to talk to me, tell me the truth." Lisa called me that same night. I am not going to lie. I felt a knot in my stomach when I saw her name on my screen. Despite everything, there was a part of me that still missed her. That same part that remembered our sleepovers, our endless conversations about our dreams and plans, and how we had always been each other's safe haven. But that Lisa was long gone, and I was not sure if I had the strength to face what was left. I decided to answer. Lisa started with a timid, "Hi Annie." Her voice sounded like she was walking on broken glass. I did not answer her immediately. I wanted her to be the one to initiate. After a few uncomfortable seconds, she sighed and blurted out, "Look, I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But please listen to me." I did not say anything. I just listened as she launched into a monologue that sounded rehearsed but also desperate. She explained that when she met Ryan, everything was like a whirlwind. "I never planned to fall in love with him," she said, "and I know that does not excuse what I did. But I was scared. I did not know how to handle it. So I walked away. That was nothing new to me. I always knew she had distanced herself. And I always suspected why. What really interested me was knowing why. After all this time, she had decided to talk to me. And why now, Lisa?" I asked, interrupting her for the first time. My voice sounded colder than I expected. "Why now? Why did not you say all this 5 years ago? Why wait until it does not matter anymore?" She was silent for a moment and then said something that left me speechless. "Because I never stopped feeling guilty. And now things with Ryan are not as perfect as they seem. I need someone who understands me. And that was always you." Excuse me? Is she telling me that she wants me to be her shoulder to cry on because her marriage to my brother is not working? It was as if all the repressed emotions from years past started to boil over. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and above all, disbelief. How can you have the nerve to tell me that after everything that happened? Lisa, are you really telling me that you need my support now? After how you treated me? After how both of you left me as if I meant nothing? My voice was trembling, and I do not know if it was from rage or pure frustration. She tried to justify herself. She told me that Ryan had changed after the marriage, that what once seemed charming was now controlling, that he had always been the center of attention, and that it was starting to wear her down. "I am not saying he is a bad man," she said, "but it is not easy living with someone who always needs to be the hero of the story." I laughed, although it was not a laugh of happiness. "Oh, so now you understand how I have felt my whole life?" The conversation continued, and although there were moments when Lisa seemed genuinely remorseful, I could not shake the feeling that something was not right. Was she really looking for my forgiveness? Or was she just looking for an escape from her problems with Ryan? In the end, I told her I needed time to think. I was not ready to accept her back into my life just like that. She seemed to understand and told me she would be there when I was ready. But I could not shake the feeling that this was not just about me. There was something more she was not saying. And my suspicions were confirmed a few days later. My mom showed up at my house one afternoon. As usual, unannounced. As soon as I opened the door, she walked straight into the living room and started talking as if nothing had happened. "Lisa came to see me," she said. "She was very worried about how you were feeling." I froze. Lisa went to talk to my mom? Why? What was she trying to achieve? She says she knows she made mistakes, but she wants to fix things. Ryan agrees. Then my mom added something that made me feel like I had been punched in the stomach. "In fact, they were thinking of asking you something important." Asking me something? What could be so important to them after everything that had happened? "They want you to help them with their daughter." It turns out Lisa and Ryan had a baby last year. A girl named Emma. I knew, of course, because my mom would not stop talking about her first grandchild as if it were Ryan's greatest achievement. But I had never met Emma. They had not invited me to her baby shower, or even sent me a message when she was born. Now, suddenly, they wanted me to be involved. Help them how? I asked, trying to remain calm. "Well, Lisa is working again, and Ryan is busy with the business. They need someone trustworthy to take care of Emma for a few hours a week." My mom said this as if it were the most logical thing in the world. as if it were a small, insignificant favor, but to me, it was as if they were asking me to forget everything, to ignore years of resentment and pain, and simply assume a supporting role in their lives. Honestly, I did not know what to think. On the one hand, Emma was not to blame for anything, and I did not like the idea of her being trapped in the middle of the chaos her parents had created. But on the other hand, why should I sacrifice my peace of mind for them? Why did it always have to be me who gave in? I did not answer immediately. I told my mom I would think about it, but I knew this situation was about to get even more complicated. And it did, because when Ryan found out about my hesitation, he did not stay quiet. Not a day passed before Ryan called me. I do not even know why I expected it to be different this time. Maybe part of me hoped he would ask me this with a little humility. But of course, being humble is not Ryan's style. When I answered the call, he did not even bother to say hello. "Why are you being so dramatic?" were the first words out of his mouth. I already knew where this was going, but I decided to give him a chance. Dramatic? Because I am thinking about whether I want to take care of the daughter of two people who basically cut me out of their lives. He sighed as if dealing with a little girl. "Look, I know we've had our differences, but that was years ago. This isn't about us. It's about Emma. She needs someone trustworthy, someone from the family. Are you going to refuse to help your niece?" There it was, that subtle manipulation that Ryan had perfected throughout his life. He has always known exactly how to twist things to make you feel guilty, to make it seem like you are the bad guy if you do not give in to what he wants. But this time, it was not going to work with me. "Ryan, it is not my responsibility to fix your life or Lisa's," I replied, trying to stay calm. "I did not even know you wanted me involved with Emma until a couple of days ago. You have never considered me a part of your lives. Why change that now? Because you need something from me?" That was the spark that ignited the bomb. Ryan truly exploded. "Are you going to be that selfish? I always thought you were more mature than this. Annie, I have always been there for you when you needed me." That sentence made me laugh. Literally laugh. "You have always been there for me? In what universe? Because in this one, Ryan, all you have done is put your needs above mine since I can remember. Even when you and Lisa started your relationship, you did not even have the respect to tell me to my face. And now you expect me to act like everything is fine?" There was an uncomfortable silence for a moment. I thought I had finally made him think. But of course, that was too much to ask. Instead, he changed tactics. "Emma is not to blame for any of this," he said in a tone that almost sounded like a plea. "I know things have not been perfect between us, but she deserves a complete family. Are you really going to punish her for our mistakes?" And there was the low blow. I hated him for using his daughter as an emotional weapon, but at the same time, I could not help but feel a pang of guilt. Emma did not ask to be in the middle of this mess. It was not her fault that her parents were selfish. "I am not punishing Emma," I replied firmly, "but I am also not going to allow you to use your daughter as an excuse to manipulate me. If you wanted me to be a part of her life, you should have thought about it before leaving me out for years." Ryan tried to keep arguing, but at that point, I was exhausted. I told him I was not going to discuss it any further and hung up. After that, I sat on the couch for what felt like hours, trying to decide what to do. I did not want to be the monster he was painting me as. But I was also not willing to sacrifice my peace of mind for him and Lisa. A few days later, Lisa tried to reach out again. She sent a message that said something like, "I know Ryan can be difficult, but we really need your help. I do not want this to push you further away from us. Emma needs an aunt in her life." For the first time in years, I decided to confront her directly. I asked her to meet me to talk in person. If we were going to resolve this, it was not going to be through messages or calls. Lisa agreed, and we met at a local coffee shop that same afternoon. When I saw her, it was like a flood of emotions. It had been years since I had seen her so close. And although time had changed some things, she was still Lisa, my ex-best friend, the one who knew all my secrets, but also the one who had betrayed me in the worst way. "Thanks for coming," she said nervously, her hands fidgeting with her coffee cup as she spoke. "I know this is not easy, but I really want us to fix things." I cut to the chase. "Lisa," I said directly, "if you really want to fix things, I need you to be honest with me. Why now? Why do you need me to take care of Emma when you have not even considered me a part of her life until now?" What she said next left me frozen. "Because we have no one else," she admitted, her voice breaking. "Ryan does not want to hire someone because he does not trust anyone who is not family. My mom lives out of state, and his family, well, they have never really been present. I thought that maybe this would be a way to start over with you." There was some sincerity in her words, but she also sounded desperate. I could not help but feel that this was not just about Emma. Something else was going on, and I decided not to let it slide. "Lisa," I said, looking directly at her, "if we are going to fix this, I need the truth. What is really going on? Lisa took a deep breath and finally let out the truth. Ryan and I are not okay, she confessed. I do not want to say we are on the verge of divorce. But we are close. He has been more controlling than ever. He does not listen to my opinions. He does not let me make decisions without consulting him. And now he wants me to quit my job to stay home with Emma. But I cannot do that. I need my independence. I was shocked. Although I had always suspected that Ryan and Lisa's relationship was not as perfect as they pretended. I did not expect something like this. Lisa was clearly trapped, and although part of me wanted to offer support, I did not know if it was the right thing to do. How could I help her without getting entangled again in the chaos they had created? I told her I needed time to think. I did not promise her anything because, honestly, I did not know what to do. Part of me felt compassion for Lisa, but another part could not forget what they had done to me. I knew that any decision I made would have consequences, but I could not rush. It seems Ryan cannot take no for an answer. After my meeting with Lisa, I thought I would have some time to process everything. But of course, I underestimated my brother. 2 days later, he showed up at my door unannounced, carrying Emma in his arms. When I opened the door, I found him standing there with an expression that mixed frustration and determination. Before I could say anything, he placed Emma in my arms. I need you to watch her for a few hours. Lisa and I have things to work out. I stared at him, stunned. Ryan, seriously? You cannot just show up and leave your daughter with me without any warning. Annie, I do not have time to argue, he said, running a hand through his hair as if he were on the verge of a breakdown. I know you are upset with me, but this is not about us. Lisa and I are in the middle of a big fight, and we need some space to work it out. We cannot do that if Emma is around. There it was again, the manipulation, the guilt, and as always, he used Emma as a shield. I looked at the little girl in my arms. Her big brown eyes were looking at me with curiosity, oblivious to all the chaos that surrounded her. It was not her fault, but it was also not my responsibility to bear the consequences of Ryan and Lisa's decisions. This is not fair, Ryan, I said, trying to remain calm. You cannot use Emma as an excuse to force me to get involved in your life. I am not forcing you to do anything, he replied, raising his voice, but I thought that for once, you could put your pride aside and help me. This is not just for me, Annie, it is for Emma. Do you really want to be that person who turns her back on her niece? That was it. Something inside me broke. I had spent years letting Ryan walk all over me, letting him get his way, allowing him to dictate the rules of our relationship. But I could not do it anymore. Ryan, you and Lisa abandoned me years ago. You did not consider me family when you decided to start your relationship behind my back. You did not consider me when you had Emma. But now, suddenly, I am good enough to be your emergency babysitter because you cannot handle your mess? Do you really think I can just ignore all of that? My voice was trembling, and I did not know if it was from anger or pure exasperation. Ryan seemed shocked, as if he had never expected me to talk to him like that. But instead of apologizing, he doubled down. You know what? I do not know why I bother with you. You have always been so selfish. That is why Lisa distanced herself from you in the first place. No one can count on you. Those words hit me like a brick. For years I had carried the guilt of losing Lisa as a friend, wondering if I had done something to deserve it. But at that moment, something clicked. Do you really believe that, Ryan? That all of this is my fault? Because if you do, then you do not need me in your life. Do what you always do. Solve your problems alone, and stop using me as your backup plan. I handed Emma back to him, closed the door in his face, and collapsed onto the couch, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. On the one hand, I had finally set a boundary with Ryan. On the other hand, I knew that this was probably going to destroy what little was left of our relationship. That night, Lisa sent me a message. I thought about ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. It said, Ryan is furious with you, but I just want you to know that I do not agree with what he said. I understand why you are hurt, and I am so sorry for putting you in this position. For a second, I almost wanted to reply, but something in me could not. I still felt there were too many open wounds, too many unspoken words. I decided not to respond, at least for now. In the following weeks, things were tense. My mom, as always, tried to mediate, insisting that family is the most important thing. But this time, I did not let myself be manipulated. I told her that if Ryan wanted to fix things, he would have to come to me with a sincere apology, not with demands and manipulations. What really surprised me was Lisa. She sent me another message a few weeks later, this time longer. She admitted that she had been cowardly in distancing herself from me when her relationship with Ryan began. She said that she had always felt she owed me an apology, but she did not know how to face it. She also confessed that although she still loved Ryan, She was starting to question whether their marriage could survive. "I am not asking you to forgive me right now," she wrote, "but I want to try to be honest with you because I realize how much I have failed you." That message left me thinking. Maybe Lisa was being genuine. Maybe not, but what I did know was that I could not make hasty decisions. I had spent too much time letting others' emotions dictate my actions. This time had to be different. For now, I have not responded. I do not know if I will. Ryan and I have not spoken since that day at my door. And although it hurts, I also feel a relief that I cannot ignore. Lisa seems to be trying to change, but I am not sure if I am ready to open that door.